They're saying, I just wish somebody would have said, it's okay that you feel this way. It's normal. You weren't born in the wrong body. Let's help you navigate this rather than putting them on this dangerous medicalized path.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews, David Mahan joining you today. And David, it is that time of the year. I know you're excited. Hunting season is here, but I got to ask, you've been so busy lately. Have you even had a chance to get out yet?
I've not even pulled the trigger.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's gun season this week, and the weather's been amazing to get the deer up and moving throughout the day when we're hunting. But I've not been out because I've been with you guys, which I love you dearly. But when my family doesn't eat because there's no venison in the freezer, I put that on you, Mike.
Yeah. Is dearly a pun? I have to ask. Because of
Well,
deer,
it
venison,
wasn't intended to be.
I see.
I
You got to
my
up your
family's
pun
been
game.
out. I've had my brother and my little cousin out, and they didn't get anything, but we had a good day together hunting, and that's always nice.
Well, thank you for not bringing your itchy trigger finger to the office. I can speak for all of us when I say that we do enjoy that and prefer that. But you have been busy because of everything that's going on with lame duck. And right off the bat here, I just wanted to take a moment to see if we can get an update on anything that was going on this week or things that maybe we should keep an eye on for the coming week too.
Yeah, man, this week was busy, and anybody that understands lame duck, it's a last minute attempt to get a lot of bills across the finish line. However, if a bill's not gone through its paces in the House process and the Senate process, it's probably not going anywhere. So what you're seeing a lot of this week anyway is you're seeing a lot of bills that if they've not received one hearing so far, like Samani, Representative Samani's got a couple bills where she's trying to repeal some pro-life legislation after since the world changed with the constitutional amendment last November.
Right.
She had a couple of bills. They got sponsor testimony, but they're not going anywhere, right? They're just required to get at least one hearing. So you're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff this week. You're seeing bills that some are some good bills. Like the age verification for pornography in the state of Ohio. That's not going anywhere this General Assembly, but they went ahead and had a hearing and adopted some amendments for that bill to tighten it up so they'll be ready for next General Assembly, the 136 that starts in January. So there's a lot of that kind of thing. We've still got some good bills out there that are moving. The Define Anti-Semitism bill had a hearing this week, and we had Pastor Throckmorton out there. We had Pastor Neil Darian out there testifying. And that's a good bill, Senator Johnson's bill. Not sure if that's going to make it across the finish line, but again, it'll be ready to go for next General Assembly. But we are looking at still the Parents' Bill of Rights. I would ask everybody to keep that in prayer. I've heard that there's some amendments to that one coming, and I'm not sure what they are. I'll be doing some more digging around today, but we'll probably see movement on that next week, as well as release time religious instruction or the LifeWise bill. So yeah, there's a lot going on right now, but this week was just a lot of formalities. I'm
Mhm.
anticipating that next week we'll see some solid bill movement.
So let me ask you if we can take just a small peek behind the curtain to what it's like being CCV's policy director during this time. How are you staying on top of all these moving pieces, stuff popping up, or maybe some momentum losing or bills losing momentum and that kind of thing? How are you staying on top of this and staying engaged with so many things flying around right now?
Well, as you mentioned, Mike, one of the ways I'm staying on top of it is by not hunting. And
It'd
that
be a
breaks
little
my heart.
difficult
But
to reach out in a deer stand if something broke, right?
yeah, thankfully on my property there's very little cell service, and that's a good thing. But we, it's just a lot of phone calls to members. It's keeping track of we've got a platform that we use that kind of tracks bill movement. Um, and then, looking at opposition and seeing what kind of moves they're making, popping in on the sessions and keeping track of, I mean, there's so many hearings going on. We often will jump on the Ohio channel to catch some. We'll be sitting in hearings and have AirPods in one ear, listening to another hearing. There's just a lot going on because here in a couple weeks, when we get the last one or two sessions, things will be moving so fast. Even with all of that going on, you almost lose track. And say, what happened to such and such bill? Where did that get amended into? And so it's fast and furious. But we stay on top of it.
And you somehow managed to keep your beloved communications director in the loop so that we can get all the information out to our people too. So commendable job, sir. Well, one news story that broke this week that I think is worth us talking about came out of a Columbus Dispatch article earlier this week about essentially what's a universal basic income program for single mothers in the state of Ohio. It's part of what's called the Rise Together Innovation Institute, and providing $500 per week for single moms. And I think this is interesting for us to discuss, David, from the standpoint of, is this something that actually helps single mothers? I think those who have chosen motherhood, it certainly will help. But is there a way that this could maybe have a positive impact on abortion reduction, because now mothers have this financial incentive or know that they've got some financial help coming? It's a conversation that we've been having going on around the office, and I thought it was worth bringing our listeners into. So what's your take on this story?
All right, this is what I'm going to get in trouble on, but
Here we go. Spicy hot takes.
It leans in. First of all, this to me, this is more to do with campaign financing than it does, social justice or helping anybody economically. I just spent some time this morning. It's apparently the pool of money we're talking about is coming from Franklin County, and it's looking about $2.5 million or so. I think it's going to reach only 32, right? So I'm gonna say that again, 32 single mothers. So this is not really about helping Ohioans. This is about campaign financing, right? So the next time those city councilmen want to run for office and make sure that, the Democrats hold power in Columbus City Council, they can say that they financially supported single mothers, all 32 of them, to the tune of $500 a month. That's what this is really about. And then the money, where did it go? And so we've got one group called Motherful. And so I went to see, okay, what kind of training is involved? There's no strings attached on this money. They can spend this money any way they want to spend it, right? So they can spend it on a $500 gaming system for their kid, here in a few weeks or so. But I went to their website to see, okay, the title literally says how it works. And the first thing we're talking about is we believe, right, in LGBTQI rights. We believe in, Mother Earth and climate justice. We believe in freeing Palestine and defunding Israel's genocidal occupation of the Palestinians. So, it's not just that we're funding a mere 32 mothers. We're funding a group that they know is going to go out there and make moves for their next campaign. It's sad. It's a sick use of public funds. And with all that said, you asked some really great questions, right? Like, will this reduce abortions? Okay, no, it's not even. It has absolutely nothing. Right. Will funding $500 a month to 32 mothers reduce abortions in the state of Ohio? The answer is no.
Yeah. Well, I think that just got to a larger issue that sometimes we do hear as an argument for the pro-abortion side, that, well, there are all these financial burdens, financial hurdles to motherhood, especially if a father's not going to step up and provide. So I think that there's an inclination to say, well, if you make sure that their needs are taken care of, they're financially secure to an extent, that should help. But It just seems, David, like and you know this well from your work with the pro-life movement and your wife's work at a pregnancy care center, that there's just so many other factors that
That's
take
right.
priority over finances when a woman's making that choice, that it's really I think a small factor, and you're free to agree or disagree with me on that point.
No, absolutely, Mike. I agree. I mean, you're looking at factors like, I mean, we talk about this probably monthly, if not weekly, in the policy team of, what are the motivating factors behind women choosing to end the life of their own children, and finances might be one of them. That's in there. They don't want to be single parents and financially have to bear the burden all on their own. Just not wanting to go through life with this reminder of this man, right? Constant reminder of this man that scorned them and left the
Mhm.
relationship. There's okay, my education, I need to graduate college, and this baby would be a hindrance to that. There's so many different reasons that all boil down to one word, and it's convenience. The baby is inconvenient. A lot of times when you hear, especially the left, say, "Yeah, we're putting these funds." You say you're pro-life, well, then let's reduce the need for women to kill their children. Come on, like $500 a month is going to reduce the need for a mother to make the choice to kill her own child in the womb. It just doesn't make sense. I'm kind of sick of hearing it.
Yeah. Well, we are going to keep our news segment a little bit shorter this week just because our conversation is about a really, really big and important news story. We're talking with Matt Sharp of the Alliance Defending Freedom about the Skrmetti case, which was in the Supreme Court this week for its oral arguments. And we'll get into it with Matt in just a moment. But David, we really can't overstate the importance of this case for
Right.
our own SAFE Act and what that means.
Yeah, it's something that we all need to be watching. There's 25 or so states that have similar bills already in motion, and this Supreme Court decision will have a huge impact on those bills as well as gender ideology in our state as a whole.
Well, before we get to our conversation with Matt, just want to take a quick moment to ask everybody out there if you've got questions from the past year. It's been a while since we've done a Ask Us Anything episode. Would love to do that again. If you've got anything that you'd like us to answer, feel free to shoot us an email at thenarrative@ccv.org. Thenarrative@ccv.org. It can be something that we've talked about on the podcast. It can be a news story that you've picked up on. Submit those. We'd love to answer those questions in the next couple of weeks, and or maybe even the first of the year. We'll see how long it takes to get some good submissions in. And David just loves hearing from all of our listeners. He's got the Mahaniacs out there who support the podcast and support him specifically. So he can't wait to hear from his dedicated fans, I'm sure.
Mahaniacs. I
No?
like it, but I'm gonna work on that a little bit, Mike.
Okay, you're gonna workshop it? Well, just in the
Yeah, I
moment.
think they deserve better than Mahaniacs, but they are out there.
They are out there. They are out there. Well, stay tuned. Our conversation with Matt Sharp of the Alliance Defending Freedom is coming up next on The Narrative.
Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org.
We are back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, David Mahan, and we're pleased to be joined now by our friend Matt Sharp, who serves as the senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, where he's the director of the Center for Public Policy. In this role, he leads ADF's team of policy experts as they craft legislation and advise government officials on policies that promote free speech, religious freedom, parental rights, and the sanctity of life.
Since joining ADF in 2010, Matt has authored federal and state legislation, regularly provides testimony and legal analysis on how proposed legislation will impact constitutional freedoms, and unfortunately, he has to work way too closely with David Mahan. So, Matt, we're grateful, if nothing else, for the fact that you tolerate David and help us get work done here in Ohio.
Yeah, well, we all have our crosses to bear. Mine just happens to be Dave's.
Not you, man.
Act two, Brute.
No, I know you guys have heard me bring Matt's name up quite a bit here on the podcast, and the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports. As you look on national TV of all of the amazing work that's being done, and even the Trump campaign of all the the gender identity policies that are starting to be pushed back against. None of that would be happening if it wasn't for the direct impact of guys like Matt Sharp and ADF. So again, I just want to thank you in front of our listeners for all of your hard work here in the state of Ohio. You probably should own some real estate here by now.
Well, it's a privilege to work with you guys, honestly. And there's no better group in the country that's in the States doing the work you guys are doing, of innovating, of making a real difference there. So it is a privilege to serve you guys and work alongside you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And you're welcome, Ohio. I would so we had a pretty big day yesterday with the Supreme Court. And I just want to let you just kind of rip a little bit and talk about Tennessee and how that might impact the rest of the states. I think maybe 25 other states that have SAFE Act similar bills.
Yeah. So I guess kind of backing up a little bit, there was a growing concern across the country about these gender transition drugs and surgeries. We were seeing more evidence come out about the harm it was doing. We were starting to see European countries, your England, Sweden, Finland, these other places that had been pushing these puberty blockers, hormones on kids for decades, starting to reverse course. And so in response to that evidence, state lawmakers began saying, what can we do to protect kids here in our state from this? So Arkansas was the first state to pass one of these. And then over the past few years, more and more states, including Ohio, joined them. And so last year, Tennessee passed a law that simply said kids shouldn't have access to these drugs and surgeries. We have a duty to protect them. Doctors in these profit-motivated gender clinics shouldn't be giving them to kids. In fact, in Tennessee in particular, it was a leak from Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where one of their employees was bragging about how these drugs and surgeries were huge money makers. That was their quote, that really prompted Tennessee lawmakers to step in and say, if they're focused on making money, who's looking out for the kids? Who's looking out to make sure we're not doing irreversible damage to them? So Tennessee passed this law, and almost immediately we saw the ACLU file a lawsuit challenging it. And shortly thereafter, the Biden administration hops on board, challenging it as well. And it worked its way through the court system, initially got upheld by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which then led to the Supreme Court taking up this case.
Was there something specific, Matt, about the Tennessee law or the Tennessee case that led to this becoming a Supreme Court case? Because as you mentioned, they weren't the first that passed it. So what was it in Tennessee that triggered the challenge?
Yeah, it was really nothing unique about the law. Very similar to most of the other states that have passed these and what it regulates, the puberty blockers, the hormones, the potentially sterilizing surgeries. A lot of what happens when it comes to cases going to the Supreme Court is timing. There was challenges to Arkansas's law. There was challenges to Alabama's law. Those were the first two states to pass these, but they were still working their way through the courts of appeal. And with Tennessee, the case just sort of got fast-tracked. It was a quick ruling from the district court, quick ruling from the Court of Appeals upholding the law, and then a quick appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. So really what happens to Tennessee is not just going to be limited to Tennessee. I think it's going to have repercussions for all of the other 25 states, like David mentioned, that have passed similar laws, including Ohio's.
Yeah, we were waiting, just anticipating what would happen, because like you said, Kentucky and Tennessee went straight to the Sixth Circuit, had a favorable outcome there. And we were like, man, if we could just get this to the Supreme Court. And it's looking like we could probably have an answer from SCOTUS, in June?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Looking May, June, somewhere in that range.
May and June. And I was listening to even NPR, and I listened to the whole thing yesterday. and armchair quarterbacking as, like, why does somebody ask this question? Like I know better than everybody else. I was excited to even Clarence Thomas like came out the gate hard with some questions, which is rare, right? He typically just sits back. But what'd you think about some of his remarks?
Yeah, I was overall very encouraged. I think we saw some really good targeted questions. You brought up Justice Thomas. The ACLU and U.S. government's case has been this idea that somehow this discriminates based on sex,
Right.
simply because it's saying you shouldn't be using these puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for treating gender dysphoria to sort of try and change how you identify and all of those things. And I think what Justice Thomas got to in some of his questions, he says, wait a second. Tennessee's not banning these drugs outright. They're not even banning them for adults to use for gender transition. This is about age. This is
Right.
focused on just kids. Isn't that
Right.
right? And so getting some of those key concessions from the federal government, I think were really important because that's ultimately what this case boils down to. You're regulating a specific use of these drugs and you're regulating who can use them.
Right.
Again, adults they can be used for other purposes. That's what Tennessee was doing all of this. And that's something that the court has always allowed states to be able to do.
Yeah, I love that. And Justice Alito kind of chimed in as well when, especially Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson started talking about the whole Loving v. Virginia race-based classification. And then she's like, oh, this is a sex-based classification. It's wrong for the same reasons. And then they pushed back. And I thought that was amazing, right? That they said, wait a minute, if a young man wants puberty blockers for early puberty, right? We'll give it to him. If that same young man wants puberty blockers to treat a psychological condition like gender dysphoria, he would not get the drug. And they just kept pushing back on that. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That the justices, Alito and some of the others, did a really good job of pointing that out, that this is all about the use. There's lots of permissible uses for testosterone. There's lots of impermissible uses. We don't allow someone to take testosterone so that they can throw a football further or something like that for performance enhancement. And what Tennessee was saying is, and you shouldn't be taking testosterone for the purposes of trying to transition. That's
Right.
just one of those impermissible uses. And it was interesting. I was reading back through the transcript today, and multiple times, Solicitor General Preliger, who's the attorney for the U.S. Supreme Court, kept saying, yes, and they're regulating certain uses. And I'm like, that's exactly right.
Right.
This wasn't about anything else. This wasn't targeting anyone because of how they identify or because of their sex. This was all about saying, the use of these drugs for this purpose, there's not good science backing it up. The risk outweigh the harm, and that's what Tennessee was concerned about. And probably my favorite line of questioning was from the Chief Justice, and he kept reminding them of saying, when it comes to these experimental medical procedures, it's not the role of the court to weigh in on those. It's not the role of the judges to decide, let's look at this evidence and that evidence. It's up to the legislatures. That's who we've always allowed to do that, to hear testimony, to look at the science. That's what Tennessee and Ohio and these other states did, was to look at the science. And when that happens, the court should step back and let the decisions of the legislative body ultimately win.
Well, I think what's important in what you said there, should step back, right? Because it was interesting, whenever the justices brought up the cash report, right? Whenever they brought up Sweden, whenever they brought in the UK, that our audience, if you've been paying attention, know all of these groups are walking back, some of their policies after 30 years, right? And some of these groups are being run, these clinics are being run by currently LGBT community, physicians that are just saying not only is it not effective, but the data is showing that we're harming children. And so on a couple occasions, the justices would bring these reports up, these studies up, and instead of receiving the data, they were trying to say, well, that's not what the data says, that these countries haven't banned, right? And some of them haven't. Some of them you can use, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones for the purpose of experimentation, things like that. But it was interesting how often over the period of 2 hours they pushed back on reality when it came to the data.
Yeah, it really was. And I think it shows how the government, how the ACLU, in all of this, they don't want to listen to the science. The very ones that so often accuse us of being anti-science, just listen to the science. And so when these countries are looking at the data, they're seeing these terrible mental health outcomes for kids being put on these drugs and surgeries. They're seeing even in Sweden, what was it, 19 times higher rates of
Right.
suicide for adolescents that went on to these drugs and went on to have the surgeries. For lawmakers to look at all of that and say, hey, let's not put our kids through that. Let's let them experience a natural childhood. That's following the science. And so that's where it was so troubling to see time and time again the government, US government, the ACLU just sort of try and brush that aside. It's inconvenient truth, right?
Yeah.
Inconvenient facts that they just didn't want to deal with.
It's one thing to fly you in, and we say it all the time to the members that will fly you in and let you say it, right? And but to hear the justices say it, just it blessed me to no end.
Yeah, and Matt, you mentioned a couple of times that this is the ACLU and the government, that the Biden administration's involved in this lawsuit. Clearly, this is ideologically driven, but I'm curious: is it normal for a presidential administration to get involved in an appeal of a case like this? The ACLU was already appealing it. Why did the Biden administration feel like they needed to jump on this one?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is all about ideology for them. They have long been pushing this radical gender ideology every chance they get. They're doing it in medicine by taking a position against Tennessee and the other states that have done this. They've been using Title IX to try and push gender ideology in women's restrooms and locker rooms, in sports, in so many other areas. They've been pushing it through HHS into adoption and foster care, telling loving parents that unless they affirm a kid's gender confusion, that they're not fit to be parents. So time and time again, we've seen this Biden-Harris administration push gender ideology every chance they get. And that's, again, it was so tragic that rather than the government being the one that's standing for kids, standing for state rights, standing for good science, they decided to prioritize ideology over what's best for kids and ultimately what's good science.
Speaking of ideology, Matt, there was another interesting time where Justice Alito, basically cut to the core of how should we, in law, classify trans-identified individuals, right? And one of the ACLU attorneys was trans-identified, and he just simply asked the question: Is the trans status immutable? In other words, if a person says today that they are a trans woman, can they become a man again sometime in the future? Can it be changed? And that's what I was just screaming for somebody to ask that question, and they fumbled around with it. But it seems like until we answer that question, how do we deal with the rest of the pie, right? If they're using terms like sex assigned at birth, trans man, trans woman, like you can literally change your sex. And there is no biological and anatomical way of telling if somebody's a male or female. If we allow them to go down that line, then how do you come back from that? And so I was just so thankful that they would actually put the brakes on there. Several of the justices did it. But what did you think about the responses from the U.S. Solicitor General and the ACLU attorney as to whether trans status is immutable?
Yeah, well, it shows what their ultimate goal is. So, as you guys know, the Equal Protection Clause, that was the basis of their lawsuit. They were saying that Tennessee's law violates equal protection. And that part of our Constitution has always been about the idea that similarly situated people should not be treated differently. And so when you look at that, what do we mean by people shouldn't be treated differently? It means based on things that are immutable, unchangeable, things like your race, like your national origin, like your sex. But that means there's a lot of other things that don't fall into that. So, for example, age is one of those because sometimes you can be young and sometimes you can be old. And so the Supreme Court has said age isn't one of those things. And it's the same that holds true with things like gender identity. As the ACLU attorney Chase Strangio, when really pushed on this, was like, well, yeah, it can be fluid sometimes. And sometimes you identify as a man, but then there's some people that are gender fluid and it may change throughout your life. Well, that undermines the whole principle that this is one of those immutable, unchangeable characteristics that should be subject to equal protection, that should get that highest level of protection under our law. Because if it can change like that, then at one point you could be entitled to the protection, and another point you can lose it. And that's not how our laws are supposed to work. So when they really got pushed on that, I think we saw the why that whole claim, why that argument that this ought to be that trans status ought to receive special
Right.
protection ultimately falls apart. But again, if they won on that, if the ACLU won on that argument, just think about how so many other laws, things like men's and women's sports, things like men's and women's restrooms, so many places in law where we recognize that those differences matter could all be in jeopardy if that argument from the ACLU and the US government prevailed.
Yeah, and that's where the rational basis versus intermediate scrutiny and things. Because what was interesting is they wanted the Supreme Court to send the case back down to the Sixth Circuit where they already lost, right? And if you've not been paying attention, they wanted the Supreme Court to say, wait a minute, it's a higher scrutiny issue, and if they won that, then they would win back in the Sixth Circuit. Am I correct in that?
Yep, that's right. It's
Okay.
that the Sixth Circuit, because this wasn't doing it based on race or national origin or sex, particularly, the Sixth Circuit said this doesn't get that higher level of protection. It gets a rational basis, which
Right.
just means government, do you have a good reason for doing what you did? And Tennessee's response was yes, our good reason was these drugs and surgeries are bad for kids. The risk outweigh the benefits. We shouldn't be doing them. And so the Sixth Circuit rightfully said, you've presented a good reason for this law. Tennessee, you win. So what the government is arguing, the US government was arguing is, no, we don't want that low level. We want to try and get it to heightened scrutiny where now you got to have a really, really good reason. You've got to meet some other thresholds. So they know that they're on weak ground. And so the hope is, well, maybe if we can get this punted back, the Sixth Circuit will come out differently. But look, even if you take that as true, even if you apply that heightened scrutiny, which again, they shouldn't because this isn't about sex discrimination, Tennessee should still prevail because following the science, following the growing body of evidence, the state has a important government reason to protect kids from these drugs and surgeries.
I mean, it seems to me, and granted, I'm not the expert. I don't.
I am, of course.
Yes, I wasn't gonna go that far, David, but it feels as somewhat of an outsider to the judicial process that this is largely an emotional appeal that they're trying to shoehorn into some sort of legal precedent that they can leverage. Is that a fair assessment, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. I think so much of this has been, well, look at even the arguments that the Solicitor General and others were making that they're saying, well, look, for some kids, this can be, really important. It can be the difference between good and bad outcomes and all of this stuff. They really want to make this like an emotional thing. But if you even going down that path, let's listen to the detransitioners. Let's
Yes.
listen to the kids who are on the other side of this. Hear the stories of Chloe Cole, Prisha Mosley, some of the others
Yes.
that were outside the Supreme Court yesterday sharing their story. That shows the danger that these do. And again, that's what Tennessee was looking at, the science, looking at these detransitioner stories. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't be just because one person doesn't like a law that we strike it down. We ultimately defer to legislative bodies who can listen to all the stories, listen to all the sides, and ultimately say, this is the path we're choosing for Tennessee's kids.
Man, I can't tell you how much it blessed me to hear those justices bring up the stories of detransitioners like you say, Chloe, Prisha, some of the others that actually came through. Many of our listeners know Chloe was this was the first state where Chloe came in, double mastectomy at the age of 15 and all of that, and just have been a phenomenal voice all across the country. And my biggest pet peeve is every time they come, the media puts a camera in their face every time. And my wife and I stay up all night for the next 2 nights to see if anybody aired the stories, and not one time ever. And they were vindicated at a federal level when at least 2 or 3 justices brought up their stories and say, like, wait a minute, you're acting like that if we allow these bans to stay in place, we are harming kids with gender dysphoria. That may be true, but they are not the only group that's being harmed. There's kids that we know are being harmed on the other side as well. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it really was. And again, you look at even the American Psychological Association. they admit that 85% of kids, and some studies go much higher than that, naturally grow out of this. If you just let them go through puberty, let them naturally develop, let their bodies go through this normal process. Don't stop it by putting them on these puberty blockers.
Right.
You just let kids go through that. Most of them are going to turn out really great. And for the others, we can have this psychotherapy, we can have the counseling. And once they reach adulthood, they can begin to make decisions on their own. But when we're talking about vulnerable kids, just let them go through that. And that's what those stories from Chloe and so many others demonstrate. They're saying, I just wish somebody would have said, it's okay that you feel this way. It's normal. You weren't born in the wrong body. Let's help you navigate this rather than putting them on this dangerous medicalized path.
Well, in terms of the downstream effect of the case, let's say it goes in Tennessee's favor, the ban is upheld by SCOTUS. What is the downstream effect for the other 25 states that have similar bills that are currently, like Ohio, in the legal process? What does it mean to us if the bill is upheld?
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge precedent for all 26 states, including Ohio, that have passed these laws. Again, every state has been looking at the same evidence. They've been making the same determinations. So a ruling saying, Tennessee, we're going to defer to your authority as a legislative body to weigh the science, to weigh the evidence, and make this determination. That same precedent, that same principle should apply to every single state out there that is working in the same direction, passing these same laws. So we would love to see it be a ruling that sort of clears out all of these other lawsuits so that Ohio and every other state can continue to put their kids' health and safety at the forefront and make sure that kids aren't being harmed.
We've talked a lot about, from our perspective, the positives of yesterday. I'm just curious, Matt, is there anything from the other side's argument that you thought could be a potential pitfall? Like, could we steel man what they did a little bit and say they maybe made an argument well on any case, or was it a lot of this fumbling around for answers and manipulating data toward their side that still just kind of came up flat?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the government's attorney, the U.S. government attorney, General Preligart, she's a great attorney. I think she made the best case that could be made. And I think a lot of what they were focused on is trying to make this, I think even Justice Alito called it out. Aren't you trying to take that Bostock ruling from several years ago, the one that's been a source of, I think, so much concern for many of us in the social conservative movement? Aren't you trying to take that decision and basically apply it to our U.S. Constitution? You know, Bostock was this case dealing with Title VII, which is the federal anti-discrimination law on employment. And there the Supreme Court said that the federal law that bans sex discrimination in employment extends to gender identity and sexual orientation. And so I think that's the argument the other side was making is, so, well, Supreme Court, if you've already said that sex discrimination there includes gender identity and all of this, shouldn't you take that same logic over here? But I think this is where Justice Alito did a good job of pointing out that was a narrow case about a single federal law and how to interpret a federal law. That was not about equal protection. That was not about constitutional interpretation. And that was definitely not about states' authority to be able to regulate in these areas of medical decision making and things like that. So again, I think that's the best case the other side could make, but ultimately it falls apart. The reasoning is different, the precedent is different, and ultimately Tennessee's rationale for doing this, of following the science, of using its state authority to protect kids in the medical realm, is something that has long been recognized by the Supreme Court. There's strong precedent for it. And I think that's the hurdle that the U.S. government and the ACLU have had all along, and why they lost at the Sixth Circuit in the first place.
So we know, or you mentioned at the beginning that probably May, June is when we can expect a decision. What happens now, Matt, between now and then? Just procedurally, what can we expect the court to be doing after hearing the arguments yesterday?
Yeah, this is always the fun part especially attorneys, it's what happens behind the curtain. So generally what happens is the Supreme Court will meet after the arguments, and it's just the justices in a room, and they go around and they take a vote. You rule for the state of Tennessee? Do you rule for the U.S. government? And then based on that vote, they start assigning opinions. Who's going to write the lead opinion, giving the court's opinion? Who's going to write the dissent? Are there going to be any concurrences where some justice wants to make a particular point or call out one aspect of the law? That's what's going to be happening from now until whenever the justices issue their opinion. Again, we're thinking probably sometime May and June. So this is the back and forth where you'll have an initial draft of the opinion. They'll circulate it, and some other justice may say, well, I didn't like this point, or could you emphasize this? And so it's a little bit of that back and forth of the process. And that ultimately is what produces that final opinion that becomes the law of the land, and hopefully will uphold Tennessee's law.
Well, Matt, thanks so much. This has been incredibly informative. We're grateful for your time. Sorry that you had to experience David a little bit more today by joining the podcast, but appreciate you gritting your teeth and getting through it for our listeners today.
Hey, always a privilege to be with you guys.
Matt, listen, this is a little unorthodox, but I hear the little tremor in your voice. I know you've been talking nonstop. This man is taking calls from me in the middle of the night. He's taking meetings within an hour over at the Statehouse. How can our people be praying for you in the days to come?
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. I would definitely just pray for endurance. There are still a lot of battles going on. We're still helping Alabama and Idaho defend their laws. Those cases are still ongoing. These groups like the ACLU, they're continuing to move forward with these lawsuits. And so in the midst of all of this, as much as it would be nice just to sort of press pause and wait for the Supreme Court to decide, we still got to defend those lawsuits. We know that there's probably going to be some states that say, all right, now's our chance to do something to protect kids, to follow Ohio's lead and pass some good legislation. And we want to be able to serve them as well and help craft good law. So just praying for endurance in the midst of all of these battles, and that ultimately truth would prevail over lies. Because I think at the heart of all of this, there is the lie that it's told to these kids that they were born in the wrong body. And we're advocating for the truth that no, you are not. You are exactly born in the body God created you for. And the greatest happiness and joy you can have in life is to embrace that your biological sex was a gift from God. And whatever other else, we know that there's kids that go through confusion, but there are solutions for that don't involve doing permanent damage to your body.
Amen.
Matt Sharp, Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. Thanks so much for being our guest today on The Narrative.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, sir. Appreciate you taking the time, man.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. This is great. I've been looking forward to this invitation. So it's exciting. You guys do it. In all seriousness, you guys are on my list of anytime I'm traveling, going to pull you guys up. I love you guys' podcast. It really is very innovative. It's something we've even been talking about. How do we mirror something like that? Because you guys y'all developed a really good formula, and the issues you hit and everything. I love it. So
we'll be sure to tell Aaron how much you appreciated my contribution to the podcast, and you have a Merry Christmas, Matt.
Thanks. You guys too. Good seeing y'all.
See you, Matt. Thanks so much. God bless. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Bear, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.